Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red. Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. It's time for the Newcastle match preview. I'm your Talking Reds host, Greg Oram, along with my fellow Forest fanatic from across the Atlantic, Richard Spray.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration? Hold up. Wait a minute.
Wow, you look... Stop eating hot.
We've got a little fat guy that will turn him inside out. He'll turn him inside out, inside out, inside out. Very talented, highly skilled, believable outside left.
There you go.
I'm so happy. I know maybe it wasn't intentional, but I'm happy to be the little fat guy can turn somebody inside out. That's pretty exciting. Thanks, man. That was the meta. You grasped onto every little thing about my childhood, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I mean, it was just brilliant. Well done. You just keep outdoing yourself.
It's getting harder and harder to be creative, but you know the intro is a thing, and there we go, guys. We are making sure that we, are giving the masses what they demand and so on. So, I hope you enjoyed that one. Everyone else as well. All right, with every reason to still feel happy, optimistic, hopeful, and relaxed about this brilliant season, we the fans must surely remember that it wasn't that long ago that relegation back into the Championship was a very real possibility. None of us are saying we should just be pleased to be in the position we are and not care about potentially letting a possible European place slip away. We want to win every game. We want to see our team put in top-level performances each week, and we want to stay in the top four. But the reality is, folks, we were always going to lose games along the way. And we are still in a very strong Premier League. And you get what you deserve week in, week out in this tough division. Back-to-back away defeats for the Reds has certainly given us cause to be concerned that our rich vein of form might have petered out a bit. But as Nottingham Forest travel away to Newcastle on Sunday, just remember that fabulous 3-1 victory there last season and that Chris Wood hat-trick. And one thing Forest have demonstrated repeatedly is the term, here it comes, bounce back ability. Here with us to preview the big match at St James's Park, we have the Statman, Danscape and Raf, the Random Force Ghost.
Yes, cachorro.
I am C-3PO human cyborg relation.
Size matters not.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Good morning. Raf, how you doing?
Mate, always better for an injection of Star Wars into my veins. Yeah, exactly.
See, once I've established that you are the Talking Reds Force Ghost, then I that's it. And they are getting longer every time. It's getting harder to keep them shorter. But hey, you know what? If you're going to come and watch a Talking Reds episode, the first 5 minutes is spent introducing and doing music. Simple as that. We do talk about Forest, I promise. So if you're here for the first time, all that's coming up. So stand by for that. Danscape, been a busy boy this morning. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, doing the double shift and feeling good. Having been ill last week, I'm pretty much back to normal now and been put straight to work.
Well, it's great to have you with us in your regular slot on Talking Reds. There will be the Statman Danscape with his pack of stats coming up later. Raf will give us the opposition scouting view as usual. But before we get into all of that, I want to say to everyone, we've got people in the comments already. Don't forget to let us know you're here. We'll give the shout outs. We'll mention you and your comments when we can. And thank you very much if you're tuning into this later on the playback on Apple or Spotify and so on. We thank you for being with us. Right. So just gone midday on Thursday, the game against Newcastle was still a few days away. We're playing Sunday at 2. So let's just jump straight into some early thoughts on this one. Richard, I'll come to you. We're off the back of a 5-0 defeat at Bournemouth, a 7-0 home win at Brighton, and then a 2-1 away defeat at Fulham. So it's been a proper mixed bag in the last 3. How are you feeling going into this one?
Yeah, hopefully no schizophrenic performances this go round. We just want to see us play. I keep saying it in these terms. I don't know any other way to phrase it. The way that we play, and to see that kind of performance level increase. You know, you never want to see a defeat happen, but you can accept a defeat if you feel like you played up to your level and they just were better on the day, a little bit better on the day. That happens, but just the way things have unfolded with Bournemouth and with how we played against Fulham, it's just been such a nightmare to witness. But at the same time, I think we're in an interesting position where we're up against a team that's very similar to us in that relative range of teams that are somewhat close and relatively close in points. And they just kind of have a similar undulation and, of form. They didn't play well against Fulham. They didn't play well against Bournemouth. So we've got that in common. So it'll be interesting to see what they feel. I know they got injuries and so forth. So I feel good about it. As you pointed out, the bounce back ability thing is not just a great catchphrase, right? It's a real thing. We've done that. We've shown that. So I tend to believe that's where we're going to be headed. But it's definitely going to be one of those weird matches where you could see it easily losing it. You could see us definitely drawing it, or we could definitely win it. I mean, it's a hard one to gauge.
Okay. Another away game for us then, Raf, at Newcastle. Tell us what you think at this point going into this one. And, are you happy for a point? If you got it, if someone said to you right now, there's a point, would you take it?
100%. Any of the next 3 games, I take a point from. And actually, if we got 3 points from those 3 games, we're actually in a lot better shape than I think people give us credit for. A lot of the top 6 are all playing each other at the moment, and their points being naturally have to be dropped all around us. Even with like Villa catching up on us, we've got a game on hand of them, and if we win that game in hand, they basically have to get a point better per game to catch us up, because we're getting into the home end of the season. 3 points would be amazing and would probably put Newcastle too far away from us in the chase, I would say. But a draw just keeps it all the same, keeps them arm's length. So for anyone around us, draw with them, and I'm perfectly happy.
I want to say hi to Pat Brett, who's with us in the comments. I think we mentioned before, but yeah, I really do enjoy those intros, and they will be probably longer and longer. I'll try and keep them to about a minute if I can. But any ideas, chuck them my way, guys. I'm open ears. Just rolling in is here for a live one, loving it. I've done another article for the fanzine on Elliot Anderson that will be in the next issue, so keep an eye out for that. We'll make sure people know when that one's going to be released. Steve-O says that both struggled against Bournemouth and Fulham recently. That's Forest and Newcastle, Danscape. So, we're going into a game where Newcastle have just come off the back of a hiding to Man City, a very up and down Man City. You had their backsides handed to them last night in the Champions League by Real Madrid. So, Newcastle are going through a little bit of a spell themselves at the moment where, things aren't going perfectly. We won their last season, and obviously the game at the City Ground this year was one of our defeats, which I was at, and it was very good after the first half. So does any of that come into play? And how are you feeling on this one?
I'm not too concerned with like the recent form. I think style of play is interesting that we've both struggled against the similar teams, definitely. And I think that's because obviously both teams thrive a bit on the counter attack, and I think if you Newcastle play Man City and Man City go a couple of goals up, then you're in trouble because Man City aren't going to leave the space that they have done at times this season when they've been chasing games. So I think Man City played quite direct there themselves, and with Marmoush as a new option, that kind of allows them to get a bit of pace in behind and things, and that's where Newcastle struggles. So like a lot of games, and like we say, the key is going to be whether we can go ahead or at least keep them level to the point where they start chasing the game and they can open things up and let us counter-attack and get into the space, whether we can isolate Elanga against Dan Burn and things like that and win those battles, which is probably, I mean, it might happen from the start. You might see Newcastle just come out and go for it and we can really exploit that. But it might also be a game to be patient and just get into the second half, and then the spaces will open up and we can play our game plan. But overall, just a good performance, and a good performance where we don't make it easy for them to win would be the main thing.
So Elliot Anderson, we know that he is a born and bred Geordie. He came off the bench, if I remember rightly, in the game at the City Ground. I think, I could be wrong on that, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I think he was coming back from injury. He is a player who will want to do well in front of family and friends, no doubt. So is he a surefire starter for you, Richard? And could the occasion perhaps get the better of him? Perhaps could it be counterproductive to have him in the side, or do you think no? This is a game for Elliot Anderson to go back to Newcastle. They all know that he's a good player. None of them have ever said that. You know, he's still well thought of there, as opposed to Morgan going back to Wolves, for example. So, any doubts for you on including Elliot Anderson?
None whatsoever. I just think the level of player that he is. I mean, his name's being thrown around for England as well at this point, so you can't dismiss the kind of quality of a player that he is. So he's a surefire starter for me in that starting 11 virtually every game. I tend to believe that, you know, oftentimes, I can imagine it's the same way for a professional footballer, but there's just an acclimation of getting used to certain situations, right? Not only in terms of progressing as a player in all aspects from a skill set standpoint, mentally and so forth. It's how you manage different scenarios that you're going to be faced with. And that's certainly a difficult one, right? Given where he has that connection with the club and Newcastle. And so I tend to believe this time around, he's advanced in age significantly and hasn't been that long since we last played them. But in terms of his maturation as a footballer, I think he's definitely elevated. He's definitely progressed as a footballer and matured as a footballer. And so I tend to believe that he's going to be able to handle this situation differently. I feel like he'll be composed. I think he'll do what he does best. He may have nervy moments. He may have, as Dan kind of calls them, schoolboy moments thrown in there as well, because that's just him as a footballer and growing into that role that he has now as a starter on this team. So, but I believe we'll see the best of him in this match. I think he'll be up for it.
We certainly saw the best last year of Chris Wood going back to Newcastle, and obviously his spell there, Raf, was a short one, really. I think a lot of Newcastle fans were a little bit unkind to Chris Wood because he'd gone there and they weren't doing particularly well. They were languishing towards the bottom of the table when he came in. And whilst he didn't score a whole hat full of goals for them, he scored some goals and his contribution, I think, was still very, very noticed and noted by Eddie Howe. So I was a bit kind of, trying to support Chris Wood when he went back there last season, and he was still only just getting into the side for us and was only just starting to go on this amazing run of goals because he scored 14 last season and he's carried it on now. So now we're a year on from that hat trick and he's going back again to Newcastle. Do you still feel that he's going to be as motivated to perform against them as he perhaps was a year ago?
Do you know what? To be in the head of a professional footballer and try and guess what they're thinking, and it probably changes from footballer to footballer. But what we do know is what we're told directly from the mouths of his teammates and the way that he acts. And he's he's very level-headed, very mature, very, very sensible individual. I do think I would have thought there's probably a bit of pressure on him, given how amazingly he performed at St James's Park last time out, to go, oh, can I do that again, and put pressure on himself. I'm hoping that he's mature, that just who Chris Wood is, that won't get the better of him. We saw from Elliot Anderson, very, very young, and he's actually not been playing for that long, really, consistently going there, and it did get the better of him last time. But Rich very eloquently put probably why that won't happen again. So I'm hoping Chris Wood's level-headedness means the fact that he won't just, the expectation won't become too much for him this time around.
I kind of feel like the pressure's already on Chris Wood because he's kind of carrying the goals responsibility all alone. And I think he thrives on that. And I watched the Sky Sports sort of 10, 15-minute segment they did on him this week, which was nice. And they spoke to people back in New Zealand and they kind of tracked his journey. And it was good to kind of have it in front of me to kind of really kind of see it as a visual. And when you look down at pictures of him from when he first came over and started breaking through at Leicester and like going on loans to Brighton and Millwall, he looked really young. He looked really fresh-faced and young. And he's had on his CV, then what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of clubs on his CV, but there's a lot of loans there. And it was only really, I guess, that I started to take proper notice of him was when he was at Leeds, and then obviously Burnley was when he kind of really came to the fore. But it feels like this season, Dan, that everyone's jumping on Chris Wood being in form. And I don't know, I'm almost like they're so surprised at it. A lot of pundits are look at what Chris Wood's done. Oh my God, where's this come from? But actually, he's always been kind of scoring goals. He's always been a goal scorer. And it just feels like it's clicked for him at Forest. I mean, I guess I don't even think I've got a question here for you, really. I'm just kind of putting it to you that, you know, Chris Wood's a good player. He's always been able to score goals. Should we be really surprised that he's doing so well?
No, I think he's always scored the goals that are sort of relative to the chances that get created in the team he plays for. So at the minute, this Forest team is creating a lot of good chances and he's taking them. And I think when he played for Burnley, they probably created a bit less, but he still scored what he should score. This season, he is kind of overperforming on his expected goals and things more than he has in the past. So there is a little bit extra from him. But I just think part of it is that we're creating the right kind of chances for him and we're not asking him to do parts of the game that don't suit him, running around the pitch too much and kind of getting involved too much in build-up play where we've adapted to suit him and we're getting the benefits of it. One thing that stood out to me the other day when you mentioned his career is I didn't realise he was sold. I can't remember if he was sold or loaned by Leicester in that summer before they won the Premier League, which I imagine was kind of gutting for him because he, if he'd have been able to stay in that squad, even though he wouldn't have played that much, he would have got himself a Premier League win there. So, but he's been around that kind of team. So maybe this time at Forest, he's trying to achieve something equally kind of impressive. But yeah, I just think he comes on and he does what's best for the team by just doing his job. And this is a kind of game where, like I say, if we can just drag Newcastle out a bit, he'll get some more chances to show what he could have done for them.
But when I look back on Chris Wood when he first came into Forest, it just didn't look like he was ever going to do anything for us. I remember watching games and he just wasn't in the game. And even his touch wasn't great. The ball was coming off his toe. And I just thought, God, if we signed another kind of journeyman who we've kind of pinned our hopes on, because we had the injuries with Tyrone, it was the January and Cooper was bringing players in, or the club was bringing players in to try and get us over the line. And as I said when I spoke to New Zealand radio a couple of times, the only thing of note in that first 6 months was the goal against Man City. One thing that I've been really pleased with is that it feels like Chris Wood has got a very hard exterior in terms of he knows that if he's going to be given the chance, he will score. He'll come good. Because a lot of people were half expecting Richard to be moved on in that summer, so he was going to be with us for 6 months. But ultimately, he was after 3 games, it's an obligation to buy. So as soon as there was an obligation to buy in, I kind of felt, no, we're stuck with this guy for at least a season. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, that sometimes, had Tyrone not got the injuries that he got, Chris Wood probably wouldn't have had the opportunities that he's got. I mean, I know that it's lots of ifs, buts, and maybes, and shoulda, coulda, wouldas when we are where we are. But I think when Chris Wood gets handed a 2-year contract now to stay at Forest, how do you see that next 2 years playing out? Do you see that he's going to be the main man still next season? He's earned the right to be the main man, or do you feel like, actually, you know what, we've offered him the contract out of loyalty and the fact that we want him to stay with us and contribute, but we still need a top striker to come in and be the number one?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenging sort of thing to debate within your own head as it relates to what we might have to field, given we may end up in Europe. And there's a very strong likelihood that it happens, especially if you're getting into a Champions League space, because as you just pointed out, you saw the kind of quality that Real Madrid is fielding on the pitch against a team like Man City, who's long been one of the most talented football clubs in the world. Yeah, he's an interesting character, because I remember the Coffee Club interview when he talked openly about just how much that was difficult for him, because he's a very introverted guy. And so if you look at the way the squad is constructed, there's some personalities on that squad who want to get him involved. And he sort of not only pivoted from sort of being somewhat of a square peg in a round hole scenario initially to being one of the leaders of this team, both on the pitch and off. And he does it in such a different way than a lot of the other guys do it. He's such a quiet way of managing that. And that's great to see, because you always enjoy these sort of stories in sports where people are able to sort of get into this sort of renaissance moment, because as you pointed out, there was success for him in terms of double-digit goal performances on a consistent basis, and it sort of seemed to lapse, and then he just got back to whatever that was. I don't think I've heard a specific thing. Maybe I missed it in the video that he did, as you pointed out, I think it was Sky Sports, right? So somehow he's just sort of found that sort of magic, I guess, for lack of a better word, that sort of thing that's driving him to continue to be an effective footballer. But I don't see his play slowing down. If you look at a lot of the strikers historically, especially as they approach the ages of 35 to 36, most of them begin to slow down roughly after the age of 35, 36. So we're going to hit him right in that period of time where I think he's still relatively in his prime. He's still going to be producing. We do want to have a contingency plan. We've long spoken about the possibility of bringing in, a guy from, I'm just going to throw a name out there, like Elias, from the Brazilian ranks, and someone who can kind of be that guy who learns from him. Because not only is he a good physical footballer, he's kept himself in good shape, and he's continued to be very effective physically. Mentally, he's just got such a high level of understanding and football intelligence. And so you want to impart that onto a younger player. You want to give them the opportunity to learn from a guy like that, especially given his career arc and the way things have gone. He can teach that person a lot of things. He can really impart a lot of understanding about how to deal with situations when things aren't going well, right, in your career. So yeah, I tend not to believe there's going to be this sudden dip in form that's going to create a lot of, going to start the alarm bells going off. But I do think in the off season we have to get to that point, because I don't want us to spend an exorbitant amount of money, because there's an awful lot we can't do other areas of the pitch if we just suddenly come and bring in a striker that we think can just automatically replace Chris Wood. I'd rather see them develop somebody so that there's that automatic sort of turnover when he's ready to move on, or we're ready to move on from him.
Bruce in the comments says scoring 10 plus goals for a Dyche Burnley team is a feat. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment as well. And Bruce also says half the magic this season seems to come from Alanga. Can't argue with that as well. Good day to Scotty over in Australia. He says that Callum was sorely missed. He wants to go back to a 4-2-3-1. Scott from the Nottingham Forest Australia Facebook supporters group and contributor on Talking Reds. Good to have you with us, Scott. Whose stock has risen and whose stock has fallen for you, Raf, in the last set of games? And bearing in mind, a 2-1 defeat away, a 5-0 defeat away, and a 7-0 win at home, it is a proper mixed bag there. Has anybody stood out on either kind of side of the spectrum as someone who's gone up a little bit in your eyes, or maybe someone who's fallen down a little bit in the team, that is?
And coming from me, the converted, Matt Sells. I think his stock, even in the Fulham game, we lost, but he really was superb. And that was the thing that we've been missing in our goalkeeping unit, was consistency. And yes, he may be not the most dynamic off his line, but for the bread and butter of shot stopping and what he does, I think he's just getting stronger and stronger. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think the back four all their stock has fallen. The consistency and the control of games is not where it used to be. And I treat them as a unit. I think they should be treated as a unit. That and all of them haven't been exactly as high as they should be. The one exception to that is I do think that Nico's stock is although he got tormented by Traore, I do think that his stock is kind of level-ish, and I've just contradicted myself and not treating them as a unit, which I do apologise for. But then I think in the midfield, Anderson's stock's probably held, but everyone else's, Danny's, when he come back with huge expectation, up and down. I think his stock's level because he's still not fit. Alanga has come out quite well. Actually, I think Gibbs White's come out of this quite well because even from these games, he's done well. Woodstock's just risen anyway. Alanga's kind of flatlined. And I would say Callum, well, when he plays, we do well. So it's just pretty much. So I would say his stock has risen slightly. But it's really, and we look at it, we're scoring goals. It's the defensive unit that now needs to do their part. It's so funny. 10 games ago, we were saying, right, the defence are doing it. It's time for the forwards to step up to the plate. And it's now really the other way around slightly.
We are previewing the Newcastle game coming up on Sunday, but we'll just take a quick break.
The Cheese Trader, based on Grape Lane in York, is a cheese lover's paradise. Home to some wonderful specialty cheeses, relishes and chutneys, and also with a fantastic street food menu. Try their loaded fries or posh cheese on toast. It'll be the best you've ever had. Owned by Forest fan Stu Freestone, the Cheese Trader proudly sponsors Talking Reds. Quote Talking Reds every time to get 10% off your order. The Cheese Trader and Talking Reds, the perfect cheesy mix.
Just gone 12:30. So if you fancy some cheese for lunch, hopefully you got something in the fridge. If not, give Stu Freestone a call and he'll get some to you next day delivery and all that kind of stuff. Breaking news that's just come through to my phone, not Forest related, but football related. I'm going to mention it. Luis Rubiales, the Spanish football chief, has been found guilty over kissing Jenny Hermoso at the Women's World Cup final without consent. So
there is justice in the world.
I'm not gonna ask for anyone's opinion on that because we could be here, I think, for quite a while. But yeah, I just thought I mentioned that breaking news has come through. So if you want to go and investigate that, that'll be all over your sports pages. Luis Rubiales found guilty of kissing the player Jenny Hermoso after the Women's World Cup final without consent. Okay, right, Dan, is there a midfield conundrum we need to solve now that we've got Danilo and Sangare back in the mix and Yates and Dominguez kind of not getting the game time that they were getting and Anderson and Gibbs White floating around? Do we need to really sort of pin down what we're doing in that midfield area, do you think?
Yes, we do. And I think before Fulham, everyone wanted to see Anderson and Danilo together, which I think we saw. And you saw that in some games, I don't think that's the right approach because they're not going to get any time on the ball anyway to kind of play to their strengths, which is in possession. So it's a big conundrum for Nuno to probably pick the midfield pairing that's right for each game. And I think we've got some great options. I do think Dominguez is hard done by if he doesn't get into teams, given how well he's done this season. I think Ryan Yates obviously brings his S-housery to these away games and things, which can be a benefit. I think overall, Sangare should, based on his price tag and his physicality, should be the best holding midfielder we've got, and he should be part of a team that's going to a difficult game. And overall, I think Danilo is probably, he was pre-injury our best all-round midfielder from getting to box. And then you've got Elliot Anderson to throw in the mix as well to make it even more difficult in a similar way to Danilo. So, yeah, someone's always going to be a little bit unhappy. And there's always, I suppose, for Nuno, there's always going to be, after the game, someone can say, well, we should have picked so-and-so because the quality's there. And that's just going to be the reality going forward, I think.
It's a horses for courses thing, probably, isn't it? To a certain extent. Although, I'm still of the opinion that we've got ourselves to third in the Premier League with a really good run of consistent form, winning matches, and our style of play was quite defined, and that involved Yates and Dominguez. And I'm just not ready for them to not be featuring yet. And I still feel that Yates away from home is a great option, even at home. I don't want to kind of get into that habit of calling him an away from home midfielder. But for me, Nico Dominguez as well, I think he's been brilliant for us this season. You know, there have been moments where players have lapsed and not been on their game, but I think by and large, if you think about our midfield and where we were at when we lost Sangari and Danilo to injury, you know, we brought James Ward-Prowse in to cover, and then he ended up not getting a chance to play because the form of Yates and Dominguez was so good. So let's have a think about team shape, Richard, and formation going into this one. I'll put the FOT mob up on the screen so we can have a look at how we started. So last game at Fulham, we did the three at the back, the triple M, Murillo, Milenkovic, Morato, and across the midfield, it was Williams and Aina in the kind of wing-back areas, Danilo, Anderson, and Gibbs-White in a three midfield with Alanga and Wood up top. So kind of 3-5-2. Now, is he going to stick with that? Or with Callum, we think, back ready to play from the start, are we going to revert to the 4-2-3-1? What would you do, Mr. Spray?
I would do what we had hoped he would have done at halftime last game, and he did it a little bit later than halftime, which is to get that 4-2-3-1 employed. It tends to be the formation that we've seen, and you talked about consistency of performance throughout the season. Well, the mass majority of the time, it's that 4-2-3-1, and there's a very specific sort of set of players that we've seen also contribute to the success of that. I think what's interesting for me is that it's easy probably to not focus as much on the midfield when the back four are playing as elite as they were. Now that's sort of dipped back. I mean, we understand that this is going to be another challenge in the midfield area because they have the third highest number of goals from open play. If you look at their overall team heat map, they play a lot on the middle to the edges, as we saw against Fulham. Sounds familiar. So I have a feeling that we have something like, Wood up top, Hudson-Odoi on the left. If he's not fit, I might consider putting in Sosa. I mean, we know he's not to the level of Callum by any means, but just to retain that shape, and he's a player that's growing, I think. But regardless, I hope it's Callum on the left, Gibbs-White in the 10, Alanga on the right. I would switch out. I'd put Anderson where Danilo is, and I would put because I want some of that ability that Anderson has to defend, and he's surprisingly physical. In terms of how he holds the ball up, both when he has the ball at his feet in more of an advancing position, but he's also a pretty stout defender in his own right. And I know this is going to be controversial because I know you're not a fan of this guy, Greg, but I tend to agree with Dan. Yep. You knew where I was going with this. I want to see this guy. It's just a blind hope, maybe at this point. Yeah, excuse me, Sangari. I'm very American this guy moment, and a very classic Richard this guy moment. Sangari in that holding midfield space. I just think we've got to control that midfield. If we don't lock that down and stay composed in that area of the pitch, I think we're going to get opened up again because we saw the same thing against Arsenal, Man City, Bournemouth, and against Fulham. And so, given how well that they played last week in that area. So I think we need to have some stoutness or, as Dan stated, physicality in that area of the pitch. And so I would start with that. That doesn't mean we can't rotate in because we know we've got plenty of options in the event that it's just seemingly not working. But I think he's going to play well. I tend to believe he will. And I think this is a kind of lineup that can help manage that area of the pitch that we've struggled with.
What about you, Raf? I mean, Anderson and Sangari in that midfield there. Still no Yates and Dominguez for Richard. Are you happy with what he's put there? What are you thinking?
No. But again, it's just trying to guess what's going on now.
Yeah, but
I'm on what Newcastle are probably.
I'm trying to guess what Neil's going to do. What would you do? Just give us what you would do.
Yeah. So for me, this is not the game to roll the dice with Sangari. It's away from home at St James's Park. He doesn't start for me. This game is built for Yates. We need him to wind up Bruno Guimaraes massively, and we need him to break up the play of Tonali, of just break the game down, with Tonali being a creator and the engine room. So he has a massive role to play. But they play a midfield three. And we lose games when we lose the midfield every single time. So I genuinely think one of Hudson-Odoi and Alanga are going to get sacrificed for Dominguez to play up on one of those sides. And it might be Callum, just because, again, not to risk him and give him a half a game. Again, it's absorb. I'll come on to Newcastle and what they're trying to do, but they've lost their last 2 games. Okay, there is going to be pressure on them to come out and get at it. So we need to absorb and we need to match them 3 in midfield. So I think Dominguez kind of drops down, and then either him or Anderson can break to then have that left-hand role. But we need genuinely 3 actual proper tackling midfielders to cover them. So I think it will be something like that. Yates definitely needs to play for me. I think Dominguez has a role, and you can't not play Anderson. And then it's either Elanga or Callum Hudson-Odoi. And we'll come on to, for me, we'll come on to why. But Burn, Dan mentioned, Dan Burn. No, but we'll mention why Burn's an issue. Something we can exploit, and to exploit Burn maximum is having Elanga rather than Callum Hudson-Odoi on there.
Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. Danscape. So coming to you now, just to update those that aren't watching. We still kept the same back 4. We've evolved it to an Anderson Yates midfield, Dominguez on the left, Gibbs White in the 10, Elanga right, and Wood up top. What would you do differently, if anything, Danscape?
There was 3 things that stuck in my mind after the Newcastle game at the City Ground, and one of them was that Hudson-Odoi had to do a lot of defending, and he didn't do it particularly well on that side, and he couldn't really impact the game because he was being pinned back in that way. The other one was that we missed Sangare. That was one of the games where I was like, we missed Sangare in this kind of game because of the nature of them trying to overrun midfield. So that was another thought, which is perhaps why I would like to see Sangare in if he's fit enough. And I would perhaps consider on the left-hand side not starting with Hudson-Odoi, because I just think he might be wasted doing a lot of defensive work early on. And then the third one was just that when Elliot Anderson came on, he was a little bit too, just too involved. He wanted to get too involved in the game. He wanted to take people on. And yeah, we were losing at that point. So maybe that was just him trying to get us back into the game. But I also worry about him going back to this ground and this atmosphere and all of that, that it might just unsettle him, not for the entire game, not saying it's anything about him, but he's a young guy and he's going into an atmosphere that could impact him. So I sort of thought, well, do you move him out to the left where he's not as responsible defensively for that key battle in the middle? And then do you have I'm sort of open to who those midfielders are, but I would pick Danilo and Sangare, because I think the fact is Nuno has been bringing them into the team because he wants them to get into a starting role. He's given them the 45 minutes in the last few games so that they're ready to play the games. And I think that pairing was his first choice at the start of the season. It was a pairing that I think is the right balance. And I think he's a pairing that can do the defensive work, but Danilo can also offer a bit of box to box to influence it the other way. But I'm not like wedded to that. If it was Yates instead of Sangare, it's a similar job. But I just think Nuno's trying to get both of them back up to fitness to start games and be our sort of midfield pairing.
I hear you, and I think that that's more risky to do this. I said in the post-match Fulham on Sunday that I'm not sure that Danilo's ready yet in terms of full fitness and full raring to go. And I don't think Sangare is either. And so I certainly wouldn't be on board with playing both of them in the midfield as starters. I think that for me at this point is too much of a risk. For me, Sangare doesn't start. For me, it's Ryan Yates. I'd also take Danilo out the firing line as well. I feel like he's come back. He's had a few games now, and I just don't think he's been performing. He didn't perform rather against Fulham. He looked out of sorts. I know it's a week on from that, and so a week more of training and so on. But I'd go with Dominguez and Yates in that midfield area, and I was suggesting Anderson in that left hand side area as well, because I still think Hudson-Odoi off the bench is a weapon. I wouldn't be against Hudson-Odoi starting at all. If he's deemed fit to start, then I'm happy with that. But I feel like Forest need to pick up something away from home. A third away defeat in a row starts to create a trend, almost create a thought process in people's minds that, you know, we've fallen off our perch a little bit and picking up points on the road. So I certainly feel we need to get back to picking up a point. I'm not saying that we should be going out all defensive and only seeking that point, because I still think Elanga and Anderson and Gibbs-White can still be creative enough to get us into important areas. But we certainly need to be more on the front foot. We're going to obviously still have low possession. That's not going to change. But I felt against Fulham we were just a bit too passive with our approach play and sat back just a bit too much. I want to see Ola Aina and Williams still getting forwards more as well. And the back forward is getting back to doing what they do best. We know that Aina looked a little bit out of sorts as well against Fulham. I'm hoping that again was just one of those games for him. It feels like when he goes away to Fulham, that's when he has one of his bad games. So hopefully he'll be back to his best. So look, again, it comes down to choices, but I feel the midfield is the area where this game's won and lost. So the choices on offer between Dominguez, Yates, Anderson, Sangare and Danilo, again, I think, Dan, you mentioned it earlier, we could all look back after the match and say, oh, God, he should have chosen that one. We should have chosen that one. And this is why he gets paid the big money, to make those choices. But do you really feel then, Dan, just coming back to you quickly, that the whole Yates and Dominguez getting us to third place in the Premier League and us doing so well with that midfield is something that he's just going to discount and say, well, I always wanted it to be Sangare and Danilo. I don't really care where we are. I don't really care what these two have been doing. For me, it's Sangare and Danilo.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I love Yates, and Dominguez is rightly, statistically everything, he's been up there as one of the best all-round sort of midfielders in the league. I mean, what neither of those two give you for me is any attacking threat. That's the only thing in terms of creativity. That's the big difference. Is Danilo will play forward more. Sangare perhaps not, but Yates and Dominguez, they do both tend to sort of take the safe option on passing a lot, which might not help us when we don't get a lot of the ball anyway. I mean, yeah, the only reason I think Dominguez gets dropped so easily is I think Danilo follows Nuno's plan 100%, whereas I think Dominguez maybe follows it like 80-90%. He does a little bit of his own thing at times, and I think maybe that's why we've not seen him like a nailed-on starter under Nuno.
So we go to Newcastle, who have Champions League ambitions of their own. We sent the scout out to have a look and come back and give us his report. So let's have that.
Send them back to East London! Send them back!
I hope anybody's not stupid enough to write us on.
Raf the Random Pundit and the opposition report. Here we go.
Never gets old. Okay, so Newcastle, if we kind of step through bits and pieces. So if we take formations first, right? Good news. It's very stable. They are going to play 4-3-3. And so I really can't see any surprises. Eddie Howe loves his 4-3-3. For perspective of injuries and other bits and pieces, and these are effectively the last games that we've got. So Southampton being 3 games ago, Fulham being 2 games ago, and Man City being their last game. Dubravka's going to be in goal. You're going to have Shah playing. Byrne will be playing because Botman, I really don't think is going to start. And then you've got Lewis Hall on the left wing, and that's not going to change. Kieran Trippier has come back, and he will probably get the nod over Livramento, but they do kind of the same thing on that right-hand side. One's old, one's young. Trippier gives a bit more of the Yates Eshousery as well that comes into play if he's on the pitch. When it comes to the midfield, and this is the bit that really, really worries me. So their midfield is quite scary when it's on Son. The upside that we've seen is Joelinton will not be fit, and he didn't play against Man City. Willett came in. But you've got Tonali, that is effectively the engine room. And if you think about how Arsenal play, where you've got Rice that kind of sits at the back and then starts at all of the playoff, as it were. Tonali is the engine room, and that's why I want a Yates or someone in there, because if you break that up, that stops all their play, basically. That stops everything from starting. But Guimaraes is lethal, and he's the one, if you look at the heat maps, that will start actually operating behind the three and is that connector in a similar way that we kind of see with what Gibbs White does for us. That's what he does. So it's that Tonali Guimaraes link that we have, kind of like a Anderson Yates, Morgan Gibbs White link. So there's a double job to be done there. And do you know what? Coming in, Willock's been put in there. It could be Harvey Barnes. It could be Longstaff. It could be Willock. We don't really know. But they've got a bit of a Swiss Army knife in what each of these do. Longstaff's more of that box-to-box. Barnes is going to be more attacking. It depends on what they want. And Willock, again, is kind of an all-rounder of what he can do, but certainly can be useful going forward. So they might adapt as to that third midfielder. But that midfield is what we really need to do. Up front, very stable, not seeing. Isak is probably the one striker that can rival Wood for form right about now and is absolutely lethal. This is going to be a true test that if Milenkovic and Murillo have got their heads screwed on properly again and can step up and nullify him. Massive test to do it. But you're going to have Anthony Gordon on the left, and you're going to have Murphy, who is actually a real surprise package to those outside of Newcastle. But for Newcastle, they know how good he is. He's come into the team and actually been one of their best players from the right-hand side. He stepped up with goals, lots and lots of threat down that right-hand side, actually. So very, very stable, very, very stable. Looking at it, where the danger is also coming from, their fullbacks do actually push. Hall gets quite high up the pitch, and Trippier can do, and Livramento can. They operate in that kind of middle third quite a lot. They don't go all the way to the touch line, like the byline, basically, to get crosses in, but they are operating all the way in that middle third, pushing all the way up, which is why, and what Dan was saying was, if they're both pushed up, you've got Fabian Schär and Dan Burn effectively as a two that have got responsible to hold down the back line. Now, Burn is not quick. And so if you can have Alanga's pace, that is where, if we counter, again, through transition quickly, and this is what we're talking about in midfield, being able to give quick ball out, to get it to Gibbs White, to release Alanga, a lot of danger can be, we can inflict a lot of damage. And again, Alanga is on Burn's side as well, which is really, really promising. So catch Hall up the field, and there's a huge amount of promise that's in behind there. So that's kind of the formations. When we look at of how they are, it's actually really weird. If we look at their last 2, 4, 6 games, right? We've played the same teams since December of their last 6, right? They lost to Man City 4-0. We lost 3-0. They lost to Fulham 2-1. So did we. They beat Southampton 3-1. We beat them 3-2. They lost to Bournemouth 4-1. We lost 5-0. We both beat Wolves 3-0. And then Spurs is probably the only differential where we won 1-0 and they lost 2-1. But you can see it's really quite evenly matched and stylistically and how we're getting results against them. The edge for them is they are at home. But because I said they've lost their last 2, I think the crowd will really be on them to come out the traps really, really quickly. We've got to be aware of that. But overall, if we look at SofaScore, where's their actual performance and form coming from? Isak's not a surprise that it's him. Bruno Guimaraes we've talked about, and those are really, really top two. Hall is a massive threat down the left and have a huge amount of productivity through the left rather than the right. Because of course, you've got Gordon now down the left. So their left is a big, big, big threat. I've talked about Murphy coming up, and Pope's been great for them in goal. Tonali hasn't got the best scores, but that's because he does the simple things. And he is actually the key to shutting it all down. But interestingly, we shouldn't have fear. Because if we look at how many players have got an average through the season of above 7 on SofaScore, they've got 6 players. We have 9. So if we get back to doing what we do well, be very, very compact, break out the midfield, transition quickly, we will hurt them. down our right-hand side and target Burn. And that's the key, I think, to possibly nabbing a 1-0 and getting out of there. I think it's going to happen? We'll come on to that later. But that's for me how I think it might work or not work.
Brilliant. Okay, great report, really informative. And for those of you listening and watching, hopefully, you know, when you're watching the game and looking at it now, Raf's detail might help you just to kind of have a look and see how Newcastle's going to set up against us going into this one. So we've looked at the opposition. Let's have a closer look at Forest against the opposition.
I'm a Statman. Fazendo som, fazendo som. Pedrinha Moraes fazendo som, fazendo som. E Pedrinha Moraes fazendo som.
Oh, yes. The Statman Danscape's with us. So, over to you.
Yes, usual sort of stats for this game. Starting with just players and how much they sort of rank in terms of chance creation and shot conversion. So on this chart, the further right you are, the better you are at converting shots and taking shots. And the further at the top you are, the better you are at creating the chances. And you can see what's kind of good in terms of this left-hand side is that Forest have got 4 players there in terms of chance creation that all pretty much sit above the Newcastle players. So in terms of Hudson-Odoi, Elanga, Gibbs-White, and then Anderson in that mix, they are all more creative this season than the likes of Gordon, Guimaraes, and Murphy. So that's proving why we're above them in the league, is because we've got the better creative players there. Anthony Gordon's one of those players that does score a few goals, although, and this is touch wood curse, he's never seems to have had a good game against Forest. You know, he's never really impacted a game against Forest, touch wood. I was pleased to see, I think Harvey Barnes is out injured because he normally does impact a game against Forest, so that's good. But he's in the middle there. He's sort of the most all-round player, if you like, of both teams, but he's injured, so we don't have to worry about him. And then on the right-hand side, where Chris Wood is normally miles out in front of everybody in terms of converting shots, actually, Alexander Isak is just ahead of him at the minute. And what Isak offers, which is why he is probably one of the best forwards in Europe or in the world, is that if you look at where he's at in terms of creativity, he's up the chart there, whereas obviously Chris Wood is a goal scorer. Isak is more of an all-round kind of player that might not score on the day, although he probably will, but he can help create chances there. So, yeah, that's just a comparison of sort of where the players sit on that chart. Recent form. So this is just a kind of a league table of recent form. The higher up you are, the better. And you can see that for most of it, Forest still sit above Newcastle in terms of form. And Newcastle actually, for most of their recent form, are a bottom half side. You know, points, goals for, goals conceded. They're actually a bottom half team and quite far down the bottom in terms of their defensive frailties. The worry for Forest on this chart, for me, is also that defensive side, in that in terms of goals against on recent form, we're sort of down in 15th in the league, which is not where we've been this season. In terms of errors, Newcastle outrank us on that one, and we sit sort of 8th in that we started making more errors, which is something we were top of the league for. And then shots on target against, I was surprised by this one, is that we have now had the most shots on target against in the last this is like the last 30 days, which is like 3 or 4 games depending which team, but this is averaged out per game. So that is a big worry, is that we've gone from a team that was top 2 or 3 for stopping teams getting shots on target, and they are now, despite, if you go to the final column, the goalkeeping performances for Forest still being the second best in the league of late. So there is, you know, what we touched on earlier, we've got to stop allowing these teams chances that we were very good at in the past. So that's that one. And then, was there another graph?
I think I might have 2 the same, sorry, for some reason.
Okay. That's all right. I think the other one was just sort of home and away, head to head. And you know, the thing with Newcastle is a lot of their stats are very average. They're not, you know, they don't really stand out in a lot of things. They are quite an average side. But this one was looking more at Forest. So this is, I suppose this is on the discussion of how you view this game. How important is our games against the top 10? You know, the Arsenal games, the Man City games, the Newcastle games. And if you look at I mean, I think this has been mentioned before, but perhaps not fully appreciated, is that Against bottom half sides, Forest have only dropped 2 points all season so far, which was the draw against Wolves at home, where they scored that screamer out of nothing. Other than that, we've kind of taken full points against everybody else in the bottom half of the team, in the bottom half of the table. So the reason we're third in the league is not because on our day or on both teams' best day, we're necessarily a better team than Newcastle or Fulham or those other top half teams. It's because we've been so good at beating the teams in that bottom half of the league. So when we worry about the performances against Fulham or this coming game against Newcastle, this isn't what has defined our season so far. So yes, we need to pick up sort of a bare minimum of points there. So we've kind of taken like 30% of the available points against those top half sides with the wins against Brighton, Villa and Liverpool. But it's more for us, what will define our season is whether we can repeat in those final sort of 10 games of the season. Can we repeat what we did the first half of the season and pick up the full 3 points against all those sides? So going into this game, a point is a good result. You know, a point just helps tick us up on that kind of competition against the top half. And a win would be a brilliant result. And you know, across these next 3 games, we just sort of need that 30% of the points, really. We don't need to go out and win these games to cement our position in that top 5 or 6.
Outstanding as ever. Yes, indeed. Right. We are fast approaching the end of this episode. Wanted to just touch on a few other things. But first, we need to do this.
They tried to put me on the cover of Vogue, but my legs were too long.
Regular viewer to Talking Reds, Sergio, has been on his travels again, and he's sent us another shot of his legs. So this is Sergio's legs. We have to try and work out, team, where he is. You get a guess each. So he's no longer in America. Last time he was in Vegas and LA and things like that. He's moved on from there and he's on his travels somewhere else. A whole new different continent. So it's outside of Europe, not in America. So have a quick look at those nice tanned legs of Sergio. You can play along in the comments if you so wish to. Where is Sergio Richard this time?
Yeah, originally I thought he was maybe somewhere in Southern Europe, but because it certainly looks warm. I'm going to just throw something out there. I'm just going to go with something random. I'm going to say Thailand.
Thailand for Richard. What do you reckon, Raf?
I'm going to go maybe Istanbul.
Istanbul. Oh, okay,
Turkey,
good.
Turkey, Istanbul, something like that. Yep.
And Danscape, any ideas?
I was going to say Mar-a-Lago, but you said it's not America, so he's not out there. Could be Marrakesh.
Marrakesh. So we're kind of getting towards the right kind of area, but no. This time, Sergio is in Abu Dhabi.
It's in the mosque in the top right-hand corner.
It could well be a mosque in the top corner. So there we go.
Yeah.
Serge is again watching, taking Talking Reds on tour with him and making sure he's tuning in wherever he is. So there's Sergio's
They
legs.
tried to put me on the cover of Vogue, but my legs were too long.
Too long. Richard, Tyler Binden, the player that we signed and back on loan at Reading, has won an Emerging Talent Award at the Halberg Awards. The Halberg Awards is a New Zealand thing. So he was given the Emerging Talent Award last week, which actually for a football player in New Zealand is a big deal because these kind of awards generally go to your rugby union players, cricket players, and so on. So for them to pull him out as an emerging talent, one to keep an eye on, it's got to be good news for us, right?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, it's hard, right? Because there's not a ton that we can watch of him. But what I've seen of him, he reminds me, even though he's not a left footer, he reminds me a lot of a player that I coveted over the last offseason, which is one Jacob Greaves. He's got similar height profile. He plays similar in terms of his style and the way that he gets his foot in and he loves a tackle, and he's got a little bit of skill on the ball. So yeah, he's a definite player that I think we need to pay attention to. I'll be interested to see what the planning is from Forest perspective on this guy next season. Is he going to end up as somewhat of a bench player? Is he going to go to the B team? Like, what's going to happen with him? I doubt the B team maybe is in his future. I think he might end up being a squad player potentially, but he's definitely young and he's definitely got a lot of ability. So something that we can look forward to. Part of that contingency planning that we've been referring to quite frequently.
I've got a hunch that he might feature. I know that people are saying that he was going to probably have a loan, and that's probably right. But in the close season, that he's going to be involved in pre-season, I think. And, you know, he's really highly thought of. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he gets a squad place, but we'll see what happens. Other news in and around the City ground this week that we knew about, but was announced, Richard, yesterday. I'll stick with you for all of this at the moment. Forest and England both announcing the City ground. England international senior men's team will feature there against Senegal. It's going to be on June the 10th, it's Tuesday night. I could have gone actually. I've had possibility of tickets, but it's just a little bit out of reach for me on a Tuesday night, on a school night, and so on. I mean, what do you think about this game being at the City ground? I mean, I think it's good. I like it when England go on tour a little bit. It's not just Wembley, and they tend to do that ahead of tournaments and so on. But should we read anything into this? I mean, who do you think set this up? Is this a Marinakis thing saying I want to raise the profile of the ground and of the club and so on? And look, England have put a picture of Morgan Gibbs-White in their tweet, which you kind of feel like, well, that perhaps wouldn't have been done if it wasn't going to stay in Tuchel's minds, you know. I mean, I'm hoping that Morgan stays in there and Elliot Anderson gets called up for that friendly. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not going to be above Marinakis to, as you pointed out, to want to increase the profile of the brand that is Nottingham Forest. You know, to have the national eyes on us as a ground, as a club, as a community, as you know, as a city, would be great. Yeah, and as you stated, if they can feature Morgan in some way, even if he's not starting, getting a few minutes in there would be fantastic. Yeah, there's nothing but good things I think can come of that, and that's the sort of model that he wants, right? He wants to be certainly a perennial Premier League side, but also to have this sort of Premier League sort of optics as well. So, yeah, I think it's a great thing, and I love watching an England match, and I'm going to love it even more watching it in the City ground. So,
yeah, I think so too. You know, there's going to be more. There's been obviously more. Coming out from Daniel Taylor's Athletic article about the City ground and about what that might mean. Matt Druitt, the architect, who's been on with us twice. We are going to be doing the third one with the architect at some point quite soon, hopefully, diary committing and permitting. That's what I wanted to say. And so Matt will give his kind of expert judgment and opinion on the bits of news that we know. He's not an inside person who knows what's going on, but he has an expert eye and is really good at reading these things and what they might mean and just interpreting things in a much better way than we can. So look out for the third one with Matt Druitt that's going to be coming up at some point soon. Forest women are in the National League Cup final. They made that cup final a couple of weeks ago by beating #United in the semi. A date has now been set for Saturday, the 22nd of March. It's a 3:30 p.m. kickoff against Stoke City at Walsall's Bestcott Stadium. So hopefully, I haven't checked the fixtures. I don't even know if Forest got a men's team have got a game on that day or not. With it being a Saturday, you might guess that there's a clash there. But it's going to be shown live on BBC iPlayer as well. So for anyone that wants to watch that and can't make it, it is going to be on the iPlayer. So 22nd of March. No, that's the international break. So there is no Forest match. So there's going to be the women's match on the 22nd. The England match against Albania is on Friday night, the 21st. So yeah, keep fingers crossed for obviously a Forest women win. But if you can make it up to the Walsall ground to support them, even if it's your first ever women's game, then go get involved and go and see the women in a cup final. Be nice to see a Forest team lift a trophy this season, right? So hopefully we can get a few more people along to that one as well. All right. That takes us to the end of this episode. Thanks ever so much for being with us, Talking Reds. Raf, anything you want to say before we depart?
No, not really. Other than just very quickly on the England game being at the City Ground, nothing but good can come from that. It's really good, and I do think it validates where we are in the league to then say let's do that. But I think it's also a powerful tool to show the council of revenue generation, because actually there won't be that many tickets for Forest fans, I don't think, when it all shakes out and they do their allocations. So that is a huge revenue generator for Nottingham, which can only please the council, open their eyes a bit more as to raising the profile, getting a bigger stadium, even getting even more revenue into the city. So it's all good. And what I'd say is the women's final against Stoke are in Forest division and they are below them. So it is very, very winnable as a trophy. So it's actually really exciting.
Yeah, they should win. They've already beaten Stoke this season, and they should win that. But you know what cut games like. Raf, thanks for being with us today. Your opposition report was as strong as ever. Danscape, the marathon session this morning after appearing on Forest Focus, and now on your regular Talking Reds. You're a man in demand at the moment.
I'm going to need an extra portion of cheese for lunch to recover, definitely. No, just delighted to be here. I think the other good thing with that England game at the City Ground is presumably that's another little PSR boost. It's like having an extra match day throughout the season to help our PSR numbers as well. So nothing but good stuff for it. But yeah, other than that, nothing else to add. Just looking forward to the game at the weekend.
Fantastic. Thank you also for being with us. So Richard Spray over in Oklahoma. What are you thinking, mate? Are you going to give me a score prediction before we finish? Because I come to you for the score predictions now for the Newcastle game.
Yeah, quick shout out to Dan's brother. Happy birthday to Dan's brother. Yeah, it's okay. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to make you look bad or anything. But yeah, so I'm going to say 2-0 Forest. I genuinely believe there's something to this bounce back ability thing that our wonderful Greg Orham, because we will give him credit for that phrase. He was the guy who started that, I believe. Anyway, I think there's a 2-0 performance in us. It looks like a Chris Wood. I'm going to go Chris Wood brace because I feel like he's going to feel the mystique again that he felt last season. He's going to get those goals for us. I feel like we're going to show up and play the way that we know we're capable of playing and provide a great performance along with a great and necessary and needed 3 points to kind of keep us at a distance between these teams just below us, like a Villas and like the Fulhams and so forth. So yeah, I'm feeling good about that, but very confident.
Good stuff. Raf, quick score prediction.
We haven't been ourselves. If you discount the Bournemouth 7-0, we haven't been ourselves in a while, actually. And Newcastle have to win. We don't have to win this. Newcastle have to win this. Isak will score. I reckon they'll win 2-1.
Got to highlight that Alan in the comments says a Forest big win. That's my dad. First time ever commenting on the pod. Hey, Dad. Hey,
Same
Dad.
beard. Same beard.
I know we do look alike. He's even got his glasses on. So looking good there, Dad. I'll pop up and see you in a bit. So my dad says a big win. And what else would he say? Thanks, Dad. Dan, what are you saying?
Happy birthday to my brother. I'll just sneak that in quick. I'm saying 0-0 because in the past when I predicted 0-0s, there's been some good Forest wins. So I'm just going 0-0. Just hope it works.
And I'm going to say 2-2, Desmond. I think that as much as I would love us to win, and I'm always super optimistic, I was at Fulham and it wasn't great. I think that there's still a little bit of, work to do to really kind of get back into our groove. It would be wonderful to do it away at Newcastle, but I think Desmond 2-2 is what I am saying for this one. Right, I'm going to wrap it up. We've gone way into added time on this one. So, Raf and Dan, thank you for being with us. My co-host, Richard in Oklahoma, as ever, super stellar stuff. So, guys, Forest travel to Newcastle for the big game. We want to have that bounce back ability, but more than anything, I think it's important that we just don't lose this one. A point at Newcastle is a good point. Come on, you Reds.
Join Greg and Richard right here on time.